Hi, you guys. My name's Travis, and I'm an alcoholic. And I've been sober since November 30th of 99. And I don't have one of those little spiels that people say after that, or if, it's by God miracle, or people are grateful and I'm astonished, or what did Mark say? Nothing's changed with my entire life. And so I always, after I say my sobriety date, there's this kind of little flutter, like, what do I say now? Where do I start? What do I do? Well, basically, it's what do I do with my hands? That's been my life, most of my life. Where do I put my hands? That hasn't changed, and I still get it at the end of meetings where we do the keep coming back. It works if you work it. And often there's still that little flutter in my heart that goes, okay, do I turn to the left, or do I turn to the right, or do I look at the person across the room, or do I just scurry to the bathroom? It's odd that hasn't changed, but that's fine, because I'm coming here now. I wouldn't have come and asked for help before. Okay. I'll start. My sponsor likes me to tell this. I started drinking with a midget Mexican prostitute named Yes Yes in Matamoros, Mexico in the mid-1980s. And I wish I could tell you that it got better from there, but it did not. It was all downhill. And I used to say, I've heard a lot recently about people saying how their past changes the longer that they're sober, and that my past has changed. For a long time, I said that I did pick up at alcoholism. I picked up drinking with Yes Yes at throwing up. And I think blacking out, I don't really remember, that was a long time ago. But it wasn't, alcoholism I don't think was some magic line that I found like it talks about in our literature. I kind of believe I picked up at alcoholism from the beginning. But what's interesting is that I didn't continue drinking. That was when I was a senior in high school. I discovered that I was so proximate to Mexico. I grew up in South Texas, in Harlingen, a little town near South Padre. And I discovered that I was so close to Mexico and that Mexico didn't have a drinking age, and started drinking then. But it really only happened maybe like 10 or 15 times when I was a senior. In high school, and I'd always talked like it was every weekend, like I just drank all the time, because I didn't really, look back and consider the facts. And the reality was I got drunk maybe 10 or 15 times, and it was drinking alcoholically every single one of those times. I threw up a lot. I remember it was the 80s, and we had those, they weren't topside, well, they were kind of topsiders, but they had terry cloth on the inside, and Bass made them, and they had real soft leather. And I remember throwing up in those one time and trying to clean that out after I'd barfed in it, and it was just disgusting. So I did pick up at throwing up. It always ended badly. But then at that point, throwing up would mean that it was the end of the evening, pretty much. Later, it got to where throwing up was not the end of the evening. That was just, hey, more room for dessert. Now let's go. But at that point, it was. And I started drinking with, that lady named Yes Yes. That we started at Blanca White's, and I would have a tequila shot and a Long Island tea and a kamikaze that was around. And I thought for a long time that, because we'd only have one or two rounds, maybe like 2 or 3 rounds, and I was like, that really wasn't a lot. But then if you add up the shots, that was fucking a lot for a skinny 17-year-old boy. And I only drank like that because it took so long to get drinks, and I was smart. I knew you have to order 3 at a time because it's going to take her 15 minutes to get back to you. And so we'd have 2 or 3 rounds, and then we'd walk around the corner to this place called Mr. Lee's to go dancing. And they searched you to get in, which I, at the time, didn't think was odd. 17-year-olds go into places where, evidently criminals go, or gangsters. And I didn't see guns ever, but I saw knives, and I saw those nunchucky bolo kind of things. So there was obviously probably wasn't a place to be. And Yes Yes was there. And the only we called her Yes Yes because that was all the English she spoke. That was all she ever said was yes, yes. And I didn't for the longest time get that she was a prostitute. It was in sobriety. I'm driving with Kimberly down, my friend Kimberly, down Lemon, and for some reason we're talking about Yes Yes, and you go, you do know she was a whore, right? And I was like, oh my God, it had never even occurred to me. That just didn't even cross my mind. And the reality is that midget Mexican prostitutes in Mad West, Mexico in the mid-1980s probably didn't have a very long shelf life. And that lady had probably died years and years and years before I had started telling this story in Alcoholics Anonymous from AIDS or violence or something. And that was where I started drinking, was with people like that. And that's not something to be desired. A little bit about my family. My mother's German, and my father is an adult child of an alcoholic. So we did not talk about much of anything growing up. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't talk about sex. We didn't talk about what was going on. It was, I got very early in life, deal with it on your own. Don't ask for help. Don't be different. It's not okay to not be normal. We're not going to talk about it. If something's wrong, deal with it on your own. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and deal with it. When Mark Carroll told his story when he came back from Florida, it was at Sunday Morning Live, and I heard him for the first time. He used to say when he opened his story, he would say, "I was born depressed, and it got much worse." And people thought that was funny, and I got it. I didn't think it was funny. I got it. I was like, I get it. That's not humor. There's only tragedy in comedy. I was born scared, and it got much, much worse. I was born convinced that the sky was falling. I'm Chicken Little. I am going to cease at any moment to possess the ability to exist on this plane as a carbon-based life form, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. I was terrified of the future for as long as I can remember, because I somehow got the idea that everybody else gets a good life. Everybody else in the world, God loves and is going to bless with some future, and I don't. And I know today that that's just pride in reverse to an extreme extent. That's really arrogance to an extreme extent. But I didn't get that at the time. And so growing up, I was just always scared. Alcoholism is not the first addiction that I came to. The first addiction I came to was sex. I was molested when I was about 12 by an older gentleman in a hotel lobby bathroom. And at the time, I thought I wanted to do it, because what 12-year-old doesn't want to do that? And it felt good. So I thought that was okay. And I was having margaritas with two lesbian roommates at Manuel's on Congress in Austin in the early 90s, and we were talking about the first time we had sex, and I told them that, and one of them said, you were molested, right? And I was like, really? No, I don't, okay. It just didn't occur to me. I had no idea that that's what that was. And I turned 16 and I got a car. And there was a guy in my high school, I think there's a guy at every small town high school in the South that is really obviously gay and that everybody picks on. And it wasn't me, believe it or not. It was this guy named David Irby. And David, I don't know how it happened, because in general, y'all know what it was like in the 70s, 80s. You stayed away from the other gay people because you did not want to be identified with them. And so for some reason, I was at David's house, and I spent the night one night, and I remember it was really odd. He had a really strange family. His grandmother ended up burning their house to the ground, but the bed was this big oak, kind of like Baroque wooden headboard with these like gargoyles off the top of it, and it was bizarre. But anyway, he told me about places in Harlingen where boys could go and do with men things that probably boys should not be doing with men. And I discovered those places, went out and found those places after he told me about it, and then he killed himself. And I had all of this knowledge, and I had the ability to go and do things that I shouldn't have been going and doing at a young age, and I had no one to talk about it with. And I had no one to say that, it's kind of odd that you're leaving lunch in high school and going to a rest stop and getting blowjobs from older men. That might not be a good idea. So that was my first addiction, and I didn't know it. I didn't know alcohol. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I was a drug addict. I didn't know I was a sex addict. Money was a deal, too, in high school that lasted forever and has lasted to this day. But, alcohol wasn't the first thing that I used addictively. I never really expected to get to milestones of life and then surpass them. I was always just shocked and surprised when I graduated from high school, and that was what the fuck do I need to do now? And I went to college at a little small town college in Georgetown, Texas, a small Methodist school, and had a pretty. My freshman year was okay. I didn't drink, and I don't remember missing drinking. I didn't have a car, so that was not odd. In Georgetown, everything closed at 10:30, and I didn't come out of the closet until my second semester of my freshman year. I ran around with all these girls who would end up becoming sorority girls the first semester. And then they pledged, because we had spring rush at Southwestern, and I had no friends then the second semester, and I ended up meeting a girl who had a lot of gay friends, and life kind of opened up, it felt like. And I was at a really small conservative school that had one cafeteria, and we would sit in the corner of the cafeteria and smoke cloves and listen to the Smiths and the Cures and talk about all these horrible socials and all these horrible Greeks and what an awful place Southwestern was. And we thought we were totally cool wearing all black, and go to Austin a lot. And I didn't really, I didn't drink that freshman year or my sophomore year, really. I remember doing ecstasy once, and if y'all remember, if you were around in the 80s, there was the deal about salt-based X or vitamin C-based X, and we did this salt-based X that I didn't really X on, and so I thought, well, I guess I really don't like drugs. And also there had been this guy that I had sex with in high school, and he smoked a lot of pot. He tried to get me to smoke pot, and it just made me cough, and so I didn't like that. And so I guess, okay, well, I thought, I'm not a drug guy, which is funny. But I didn't do drugs, and I didn't really drink my freshman and sophomore years. And then I met a guy named Steve Dobbins, who kind of brought me out into Austin. And I discovered the gay nightlife of Austin in the 80s, and it was a lot of fun. And I did a lot of ecstasy, and I considered myself Travis, the official Boathouse greeter, because I was always talking like this, because I was Xing my ass off. I was going so fast I was tired all the time. And, it was a lot of fun. And I remember I started drinking. That's when the drinking started, and it pretty much went back to the throwing up immediately. But it got to the point pretty quickly where like I said, throwing up wasn't a reason to stop. You would take the drink, you would throw up in the glass, put the glass down, walk away, and have some more. I remember throwing up on the dance floor a lot at Oil Can Harry's and then dancing in it. And throwing up, or I guess I was dancing in it because I didn't walk away. And there were these theater seats by the dance floor, and my friends knew that if they couldn't find me, to look on the back row of those theater seats, because I was back there throwing up in the theater seats. And that just didn't seem odd. That was everybody. It was Austin in the 80s, and we were all in college, and that was just what you did. And there started to be consequences in the 80s in Austin. But you see, the deal was the consequences. It took me so long to get here because the consequences were always one step removed from me actually drinking. They were always about my alcoholism, but they were never about alcohol for quite a while. One spring break, I came up to Dallas to stay with my sister and visit some friends up here. And we went out to JR's, and the last thing I remember, it was when JR's was that little sliver bar, is mugging with this guy named Carl, and he had a green and white striped shirt on, and we were standing in JR's mugging. And then I have a really vague memory of going into the cooler at JR's, which was right across the hall from the bathroom, and taking a bottle of schnapps, and we Then there was another flash kind of memory where we were at, I think, Sue Ellen's, and we were pouring shots from that schnapps into dirty glasses and drinking the schnapps, and then they took the bottle from us, and then it was gone. And then I woke up with Cassie screaming in my ear, "We're going to die." And she had flipped my car over on St. Andrews in Highland Park. And she was driving. I wasn't driving. I was, deemed too drunk to drive, and she was more sober than I, but still flipped my car on St. Andrews, which is now a private street, and I choose to believe I have nothing to do with that. But what's sad is we just walked home and went to sleep, and I didn't think of calling anybody or, telling the cops this is our car or anything. We got a call in the middle of the night from my sister, because the cops had called my parents. I guess it was in my name. Maybe the insurance was in their name. But anyway, the cops called my parents, and my parents called my sister, and my sister called me. And all they knew was that they had found my car upside down, and there was blood all over it. And it didn't occur to me to apologize to my parents or to say, "I'm sorry I put you through that," or "that must have been scary for you." All I thought about was the trouble I was in and how I was going to get out of that. And so those kind of things started happening in life. I started going to kind of the jail of the month club. I went to jail in Austin and in Bryan College Station on Thanksgiving Day, and my sister went to jail with me. We both had warrants out. And then in Dallas and in Highland Park and in University Park. And in Highland Park, they do bring you McDonald's. And at University Park, I had heard that if you shared that you were HIV, they would let you go. And that is not true. I will tell you that now, because I kept saying, "I'm HIV positive, I'm HIV positive." They were like, "Yeah, we know. Okay, I got it." They don't let you go for that. But the deal was, I never went to jail for driving drunk. I always went to jail for all of I've had a really hard time my whole life with maintaining the infrastructure of a life. With keeping shit paid and shit current, and it's the cards that go with the shit paid and shit current, all that stuff. I've always had a really hard time with that, especially before sobriety. And so I would, not have my driver's license on me and not have my insurance card, and I'd probably have insurance, but I wouldn't have the card with me, and the registration was separate at that time from the inspection, and so all that stuff would be not current, and so I'd got stopped and never paid all that shit, and then got stopped again because I had never fixed all that shit, because there was something to do every night in Austin. It was a college town. There was drinking to do every freaking night, so when are you going to save that money? And that happened 5 times. I got arrested 5 different times for the exact same fucking shit. And I got to Alcoholics Anonymous at Preston in 98, or 99, I guess, 98, 99, and heard somebody say insanity's doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. And I thought, oh, I get that. I understand that, because I had done that 5 times going to jail thing. So living in Austin, finished college after quite a while. I think it was 6.5 years, and I was 25, it's 93. 25 and 93 was very old for Austin. You were past your shelf date. And I was dating a guy that lived here named Jeffrey. And interestingly, every one of my boyfriends has shown up in Alcoholics Anonymous since then. So I was dating this guy named Jeffrey, and I didn't really love him, but he loved me. And I moved up here and lived with him for a couple of months. Because just to get out of Austin, and then broke up with him and moved out on my own, and now I'm a college graduate. I finished college somehow, and I'm in Dallas, and I really was clueless. I had no idea what to do, and I have an older sister who has always been very successful and very driven, and she very much, for most of my life, we just did not understand each other, because she just, when something needed to be done, she went out and did it, and when something needed to be done, I sat around and thought about how horrible it was going to have to do to whatever it was, and how I wasn't going to be capable of doing whatever it was, and how I was so scared of doing whatever it was. And while you sit around and mentally masturbate like that, you don't get a lot done. And So she lived here, and she was, trying to get me to go on job interviews and trying to get me to do stuff. And, you have a business degree. What do you want to do? And I don't know. I want to go drink, and I want to, smoke stuff, and I want to, snort stuff. And she didn't understand any of that. And so she got me a job interview at the Melrose, strangely enough, because I had always been interested in hotel restaurant management. And I borrowed a suit from this guy and went to this interview and sat down with this man and told him, laid myself bare, and he didn't hire me. And I was like, well, what the fuck? I'm not going to deal with that rejection again. So I waited tables for the next 10 years with a college degree because I didn't understand how to get a job, and I didn't know what I wanted to do anyway. So I'm in Dallas and drinking heavily, as was everyone else. I must point out, it wasn't just me. But people are starting. I remember hearing a comment from some friends. They thought I was asleep, talking about my drinking, and so people had kind of started to notice. And what time is it? Oh, geez, I need to hurry up. So in Dallas, broken up with Jeffrey, got a phone call from the health department in 1995, and they said that they needed me to come down and have a little talk with them. And I did, and they told me that I had been exposed to gonorrhea and gave me a gonorrhea test. And then in my head, they tricked me into getting an HIV test. And I did get an HIV test, and it took weeks to get it at that point. And I remember going in and sitting across from this lady named Linda, an African-American lady named Linda. She was not overweight, but her clothes fit her a little tightly, and her hair was pulled back into a really tight bun, and she sat across the desk from me, and she told me that I was HIV positive. And she pushed a box of Kleenex across the desk to me. And I remember thinking, what the fuck do you want me to do with this? I just got to get out of here. I got to run. And I ran for the next 3 years. And life got really small and really gritty and really dark and really dirty really, really fast. I started getting evicted from apartments. I lost a car, which I did. It wasn't repossessed. I just lost it. It was gone. Life just got really small. I lived in the bedroom in my apartment, and my cat had the rest of the apartment. And I had this futon from college, and she would pee on this futon, and it was disgusting. And I didn't see anyone. I didn't let anyone come into my apartment. And I discovered smoking coke on foil. Through this guy that I met on remember the phone lines? On this phone line. And I went over to his house, and he lived at that place on Kings Road before they kind of redid it. They've kind of rehabbed it. It's kind of nice now. Then it was not. And he lived there. And he had interestingly looking back on it, he kind of had to talk me into it. It took a couple of times for me to go over there and smoke coke with him for me to get it, for me to understand why this was so special. And you did it, on foil with baking powder and water, and it was terribly white trash, and I absolutely fucking loved it. It was wonderful. And it was a very underground sex, drugs culture, which I'm sure probably still exists in Dallas, but I don't know anything about it anymore. And life just got bad. I got evicted from that apartment, and I moved in with this guy who had HIV also, and had just gotten out of the hospital, and he was really sick. And one Sunday morning, I got up to go to work. I was working at Neiman's waiting tables in the downstairs restaurant in North Park, and he was dead on his bathroom floor, and he had overdosed. And I always think I'm going to know what to do in an emergent situation. I'm with it. And I had no fucking clue. And I kind of dragged him out into the kitchen and kind of shook him like this and called my friend Cindy. And I was like, Michael is cold and he's purple and he has splotches all over him and he's not moving. What do I do? And she was like, call the fucking ambulance. And so I called the ambulance and they came and Cindy came. and helped me get through that day. And, you would think that, or I, looking back on it, would think that maybe that would make some kind of dent, that would, I'd have some reaction to that, some emotional reaction. And I remember thinking, it's odd that I remember thinking that I should. I remember thinking other people probably expect me to be upset. And it didn't. It just didn't really penetrate. And I know that was on a Sunday, and I know I was drinking and smoking by that Friday. I had so Michael's gone. I'm living in that apartment. There's a guy dealing crack right next to us. And it took me until the last time I told my story at Lambda to realize, I talked about your past changed. I had told my story, dozens of times over the 21 years I've been here, and I always thought that, when I heard people sharing about being a prostitute, that I had never done that, and I would have told you that I never did that. And while I was standing at the podium last time at Lambda, it came out of my mouth that guy would give me drugs and I would do things for him, and that is the definition of a crack whore. And that I was a crack whore, and I had been a crack whore for quite a while and not known it. So life rocked on. I got evicted from that apartment. I moved into this other apartment. I was... everything was a secret. I didn't have a lot of people in my life. For me, it was very different being HIV positive in the 90s than it is today. I didn't want anybody to know. What the reality was I didn't want people to think that, I didn't want people not to want to have sex with me. That was the only thing that I really cared about, because that was the only way I related to people. I had no idea how to really have any kind of intimacy that was non-sexual. I think it was the molestation thing and the getting sexualized so early. I had this, this is sex over here and this is intimacy over here, and they have nothing to do with each other. I had no clue about it. So I'm living at this next apartment, and the lady down the hall to me is going to Alaska to be a stripper, and she let me borrow her car. And so I drove this car down to Austin, and it died, and I had this really awful couple of days in Austin of trying to get this car fixed, and my parents bailed me out yet again, and came up to Dallas. But the ride back to Dallas, I'd had these horrible couple of days, and I remember I took a bus because a cousin loaned me the money for the bus, and I'd never been on a bus before, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It was quite pleasant, and I remember driving up 35 and looking out across, towards, I guess, around Belton, and there was these gently rolling hills, and the sun was setting, and I was cool, and it was comfortable, and it was so beautiful. And I had this idea, what I think today was a psychic change. This thought came into my head that you can break this chain. It doesn't have to be this way. And what that was about was, I have a niece who, my sister had her at that point. She was still a baby, and my sister and I are both adopted. And so we had never had any physical similarity to anyone because we weren't biologically related to anybody. And this niece looked like my sister, and that was so, so important to me. And I think that was about that she doesn't have to know you this way. You don't have to live like this. And so I came home and I told my parents that I was HIV positive, and they said some things that were hurtful but that weren't hateful. They said what they knew, and they ended up coming out that I'd been abusing drugs and that I had been drinking heavily for years and years, and I was honest, for the first time in a long time. And I quit drinking and using as a lifestyle. I drank and used after that, but it wasn't an every night thing. And I started going to take care of myself, and I went to a doctor, and he put me on a medication that I was very allergic to, and they told me to look for a rash. And I don't really know how long I was on it, a couple of weeks maybe, and I just got more and more kind of confused, and it just didn't feel right. And I called the doctor a couple of times, and the nurse would just kind of poo-poo me and dismiss me. And I went and camped out in their office one day, and he saw me. And I don't remember much about that. I remember laying in an exam room, and I had an IV, I think. And then I remember them sending me to the hospital, and I remember the check-in process at the hospital being really difficult. She was, you have to give them all that information, and I couldn't come up with the information. And I vaguely remember being in a hospital room because there was a window here, and there was a bathroom here, and the door was over here. And then a lady came in and woke me up, and evidently she had brought me lunch, and she was saying, "You didn't want your lunch." And then I was out again, and I was out for the next 6 weeks. And I had developed the rash, but I had developed the rash on my organs. And my liver had quit working, which had made my kidneys quit working. And then that day, I was fighting with the doctor, because I was delirious, and he was putting my main line on. And your main line used to be this really long needle, and he punctured my lung. And so I had hepatic and respiratory and renal failure, and they put me in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks. And I don't really remember much about it. What I remember is the dreams that I had, and it was like being inside fear, and it had a smell and it had a taste, and I just remember thinking, it's over, and I've wasted it, and there's nothing I can do. And I woke up and did get better, and I ended up being in the hospital for 11 weeks, and I had to learn how to walk again. And there was a question about whether I was going to be able to live alone again or not. And I went home and lived with my parents for a month, and my mother and I almost killed each other. So I came back to Dallas and went back to work at Neiman Marcus and started going to meetings. And I had been to AA meetings before. I'd been to Lambda when we were on 2727, and I got a desire chip. And I don't remember much about the meeting except that there was this hot guy sitting behind me, and he might as well have just been a big rock of crack, because I could only concentrate about him. I was just focused completely on him. And Charlie Brown chaired the meeting, and Starkey was there, and she shared something. And surprisingly, I got up and got a desire chip, which was very not like me, but I did that. And then I went to counseling after that. And I told the lady, she said, "How are you feeling?" And I told her how I was feeling physically, because I had no idea how to describe feeling emotionally. And I told her, and I think I was getting sick that day, and I told her that I felt a little flushed and I felt a little fevered. And she said, "Well, I think you've had your spiritual experience." And I think, you know what? I think you're right. And I never went back to her, and I never went back to Lambda after that. And so I'd been exposed to AA, and I'd gone to Preston a couple of times. And all I remember about going to Preston was I went with this heroin addict girl from work, and she and her husband were trying to quit using heroin. And that it was when Preston was over at the other place. And I just remember sitting in those seats on that linoleum floor and feeling like the seats were so loud. If you barely moved, it was just so loud. And I was just so aware of where I was and who was around me, and I wasn't listening to anything anybody was saying, and I didn't get anything out of it. But I came back to Dallas, and I started going to Preston, and I started hearing things like insanity's doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. And I thought, okay, I get that. And I didn't feel at home in Alcoholics Anonymous right away, like people are, I came here and y'all love me and Pollyanna and everything's wonderful, and that was not me. I knew I needed to be here. I knew that y'all had the answer, but it still made me incredibly uncomfortable being around you people. The fact that I needed you to save my life did not mean that it felt good, or that I enjoyed it for a long time. And so I went to Preston for the first year, and I didn't have a car. And I rode my bike everywhere I went in Dallas, and so I rode my bike to meetings all the time and did what I needed to do. And Sponsee's calling. And that first year of sobriety, looking back on it, it seems kind of magical. I don't think it felt like that at the time, but looking back on it now, I very much have idealized it, I think. I remember hearing a guy say that he had always compared his insides to other people's outsides and come up short. And I thought, this guy is a fucking genius. You're right. That is exactly how I've always felt. I had always felt like everybody else got it. Like everybody else knew what was happening in life. Everybody else got that owner's manual that told you go from A to B. If you want to get to Dubrovnik through Rome, you take this route. Everybody else knew that. I didn't know that. But I thought, okay, maybe, just maybe, there are people out there who have felt the same way I have always felt, but they've looked okay on the outside. Maybe these people are those people. Maybe I've found people who it's okay to say, I don't understand why I have to fucking pay my electricity bill every goddamn month. Where I could say, and they said, because it's due. Because they're going to turn it off if you don't, But even beyond that, just they knew how to do life. And I had never known how to do life. It had always been, I just was stumped by life before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And God, I like telling my story because it makes me remember things and it makes me look back on things and be grateful for them. I was living in this really small one-room apartment, and I didn't have a car, and I was riding my bike everywhere. And I didn't really have any friends because the people at Preston, the women kind of didn't know what to make of me, and the guys didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I'm grateful to remember that. I got a sponsor, and we worked together for a couple of weeks, I don't know, maybe a month, I don't know. And he fired me because I was not willing to go to Lambda, which I don't think was valid. I think what we do with our parts has nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. But he also, because I wasn't willing to take a commitment and do service work, and he was right about that. And he fired me, and right after that, I became willing to answer the phone at Preston on Sunday morning, or on Friday morning. And so I did that for about a year and a half or something. And I got another sponsor, and I had him for we met once. And I remember it was at that Herrera's, the little one over on Maple, and he told me something that I've done every morning for the past 21 years. He said that when you wake up in the morning, your first thought's probably going to be negative. So what I do, Travis, is I wake up and I say, good morning, Fat Cat, it's going to be a great day, because he had a cat named Fat Cat. I do not have a cat named Fat Cat, so I do not say, good morning, Fat Cat, it's going to be a great day, but I wake up and say, good morning, God, how are you today? And I've done that for the past 21 years, because he's right. My first thought is usually, oh, shit. It's not, yay, I get another day of sobriety. It's usually, fuck. And so I do that. And that's all I remember about what we talked about. And then I started working with a gentleman who had just come back from Florida. And I heard him speak at Sunday Morning Live when we were over at the other place. And we had a couch at the front when we were over at the other place. And he shared, and I sat there and bawled. I always think if anybody knows Julie W., her first meeting at Lambda, she just sat there and bawled. That was me in that meeting with Mark. I just sat there and bawled. And I don't know what it was. He shared, I do know what it was. He shared a story about he had gone to Florida and he had had heart bypasses. And he shared that while he was in the room with the surgeon said, I understand you have a gift. You can play the piano. Well, I have a gift too. I'm good at what I do. But then he also said, and I never heard him share it again, but that as he was going out, he looked around and he saw all the people from Alcoholics Anonymous circled around him in that room holding hands. And I thought, I wish I had had that experience when I was so sick. That would have been so nice to have what this guy has, because my experience in the hospital had not been like that. It had been the opposite of that. And so I asked this gentleman to start working with me, and we did. We worked together for 5 years, and life started getting better. It started getting good. I bought a car, and it was a '88 red Mazda truck, and I drove that thing into the ground. And, just because we're sober doesn't mean that we're necessarily healthy. And I drove that car, and the brakes went out one morning on the way to work, and I kept driving that car. And I would just go places like really, really slowly, just kind of like hover in. And I used the emergency brake, and I drove that car until it just literally died. And then I got another car that had Tim Johnson broke the door on, and I had to bungee cord the door to the stick to the gear shift so that the door would stay closed. And I had tied the bumper to the front of it with twine. And I drove these horrible $1,000 cars for years and years and years. And then that changed in sobriety. I started doing the steps. For me, I did an AIDS ride when I was really newly sober, and it was very important to me spiritually. I had an experience. I'd heard in AA that we're supposed to have this spiritual experience, and I think I had an expanded burning bush. I don't know if it was an expanded burning bush experience or if it was a compacted spiritual experience of the educational variety, but I know that I went on that AIDS ride, and people treated each other like I think God wants us to treat each other every day on those 4 days. And I rode into Dallas, and it was 18 months to the day after I'd gotten out of the hospital, and my parents were there, and my niece was there. And I remember at the gate before we rode in, standing there and thinking, it's over. I really didn't think when I left the hospital that I was ever going to get to live alone again. I thought they were sending me home to die. And I realized that illness was over, and I forgave that doctor, and a lot just kind of lifted. And I had heard, that you're supposed to have these spiritual experiences, and I didn't have one for a really long time in AA, but I realized it had quit raining shit every day. It felt like before I got sober, it was just all shit, all day, every day. And it quit raining shit. And I thought, well, I haven't had a spiritual experience, but it quit raining shit, and that's pretty fucking nice. And so I thought I'll stay. And then I did that AIDS ride, and I don't know what my conception of God was. I just know that I started to believe that there probably was something out there after I did that. God had been kind of like this creeping suspicion for me. And it was kind of like he was just standing right over my shoulder for a really long time. And then I started to feel like he was part of my life. And that was through doing the steps. My first time through the steps, I don't really remember much about it. I found my fifth step years later, and it didn't have a fourth column in the book, in the notebook. And I know Mark would have made me do it, so I know I did it, but I don't really remember much about doing those steps the first time. But I did them, and I started sponsoring people. Sponsoring people has been really important in my sobriety. My relationship with my family has been really important in my sobriety. How soon am I supposed to end? 5 minutes? Okay. My dad was sick for the first 17 years that I was sober. He had 5 bypasses the first year that I was sober. And my mom called me that night, because she's my mom, and said, Daddy had 5 bypasses, and I'm tired and I'm going to sleep. Don't call back. Bye. Click. And I didn't know if it was my grandfather or my father. And so I was wigged out that night. But so he started getting sick, and he was sick. It got sicker and sicker and sicker. When I was about 7 or 8 years sober, I went to see him in Austin. He was at Seton in Austin. And my mom had gone back to Georgetown to pay some bills and stuff. He'd been in the hospital for a couple of months. And he had this toe, at one point, a toe that was gangrening off. And they weren't doing anything about that because it wasn't the hot issue. There was like all kinds of other crap going on. There was just plethora of just crap going on with him. And so at this point, he had this open wound because he had pneumonia, and they'd had to operate on the pneumonia, and they peeled a hole in his lung, and then they had to do this procedure called an Eloise or flap, where they cover the hole in his lung, but he had to have an open wound so they could visually check on the hole in his wound. And I walked into the room, and the doctor has his finger in that hole, and he said, "Could you please call the nurse because I can't reach the button, and if I move, your dad will bleed out." And so I did, and they all rushed in, and again, that thinking I'm going to know how to handle weird, traumatic situations, I heard the beep on the whatever, EKG, I don't know what it is, and I remember saying, does that mean his heart has stopped? And this nurse that I really didn't like very much came and stood behind me and put her hand on my back and moved her hand in circle motion on my back and said, "Yes, honey, that's what that means." And I knelt down with him and I looked into his eyes, and he doesn't remember any of it. And I said every prayer that y'all had taught me to say, the 3rd step prayer and the 7th step prayer and the serenity prayer and the St. Francis prayer and just everything that I could think of, things that made no sense to say, I'm not willing that you should have all of me, or, good and bad, the 7th step prayer didn't make any sense to say to him in that moment, but I said those prayers, and we looked at each other in the eye, and he ended up living. And I came back to Dallas, and, it was traumatic, but didn't really think much about it. And then I was driving a sponsee to Sunday Morning Live one morning, and we were talking about it, and I realized that what happened was I got to be there for the very worst day of my dad's life. He had been with me for the very worst days of my life. He was with me for the first 31 days I was in the hospital, and suctioning spit and changing ice bags and changing sheets and doing stuff that you need people to do with you if you're sick in the hospital. And then I got this gift back from God, and I got to be there for the very worst day in his life. And that was amazing. And then I stayed sober, and he didn't die. And he got to be a real shithead for about the next 7 or 8 years. And he ended up dying. And what I know is because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't stay in that resentment for a long time. It was really, really soon after he died that I could remember the good things, that he said that he was proud of me, that he said that he was grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous, for the people in AA that had been in my life and that had brought me back to them. That kind of stuff doesn't happen to me when I'm on my own. I don't interact with people and people tell me they're grateful for me being there when I'm drinking or when I'm smoking crack. That just didn't happen. That started happening because of AA. I had an experience during the end of COVID with my mom where I thought I had forgiven her for everything, and I hadn't. And the last time I went home to see her, I realized I'd done all the steps, and everybody else, I did all the steps and the forgiveness came. With my mom, I did all the steps, and I did all the steps, and I did all the steps, and the forgiveness didn't come. And I decided, okay, what it needs to be is you just need to make a decision to forgive her. And I talked to her in the nursing home. She has advanced multiple sclerosis. And I said, "Mom, I just want you to know that I forgive you for how you treated me when I was growing up. And it couldn't have been easy to have a little gay kid in the 70s in Harlingen. And I forgive you for that." And she said, "Yeah, I liked my little girl," which at the time seemed odd. But then later she said she had never asked me about a boyfriend or anybody. I'd been in relationships. She would ask about the people that I broke up with that broke my heart, how they were doing, but not how I was doing. She wouldn't ask when I, told them that I'd broken up with somebody and was upset. They would never ask about it. But she said, "Well, are you dating anybody? Are you seeing," I don't remember if she said, "Are you seeing anyone? Are you dating anyone?" And she had never done anything like that before. And I think that only happened because God came into my life, because the people of Alcoholics Anonymous came into my life, because y'all taught me to forgive, even if I don't want to forgive, that forgiveness can be a choice. And I am grateful for that. That's all I got. Thank you.